5:20 in the morning. She pushed her cleaning cart through the empty aisles of Walmart, humming softly to herself. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their harsh glow over rows of merchandise that would soon welcome the early morning shoppers. She turned toward the back storage area, keys jingling against her hip, ready to tackle the employee break room before her shift ended. The storage room door stood slightly ajar. Strange. Management always insisted on keeping it locked. Brenda Coleman pushed it open, stepping inside to flip on the lights. The scream that tore from her throat echoed through the empty store. Two bodies lay sprawled across the concrete floor in pools of blood that had long since stopped flowing. A hammer rested beside the man's outstretched hand, its metal head dark with dried crimson. The woman lay several feet away, her Walmart vest torn and stained, her name tag still reading, Tamika, in cheerful blue letters. 8 years of marriage had ended in one night of rage. Hours later, they were dead. Welcome to Guilty Whispers. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to become part of our growing family of true crime enthusiasts. Share your location in the comments below. We love seeing how our stories connect people across the world. But the truth of what happened in those final hours would shatter everything you think you know about betrayal. This is the story of Derek and Tamika Johnson, high school sweethearts who had built what everyone believed was the perfect marriage. For 8 years, they had worked side by side at the same Walmart in Memphis, Tennessee. He loaded trucks in the warehouse. She smiled at customers from behind register number 7. Their co-workers envied their lunch breaks together, the way they still held hands walking to their cars, the inside jokes that made them laugh during the longest shifts. Derek Johnson had built his entire identity around being Tamika's husband. At 34 years old, he took pride in providing for his wife, in being the man she could count on. When other guys complained about their relationships, Derek would just smile and say, "When you find your person, you know." He thought he had found his person when he was 17 years old and Tamika Lewis agreed to go to prom with him. But 8 months ago, everything began to change. Noah Williams arrived as the new store manager, 38 years old with an MBA and plans to modernize operations. He brought new energy to the store, new policies, new opportunities for advancement. And he brought something else that Derek hadn't seen coming. Tamika started staying late for meetings. She talked about new training programs, about advancement opportunities, about feeling valued at work in ways she never had before. She bought new clothes, changed her hair, carried herself differently. When Derek asked about her day, she would light up talking about initiatives and strategies and corporate communications. She lit up when she talked about work. When had she stopped lighting up when she talked about us? The night of October 15th started like any other. Derek finished his warehouse shift at 9 p.m. and headed to the employee parking lot, expecting to drive home with Tamika as they had countless times before. But her car was still there, and the lights in the administrative offices were still on. He checked his phone. No messages. She must be in another one of those meetings that seemed to run longer each week. At 10:33 p.m., Derek used his employee keycard to enter through the back entrance. He had done this before when Tamika worked late, sometimes bringing her coffee or just walking her to her car. The store felt different after hours, hollow and echoing, with only the security lights casting long shadows between the aisles. He could hear voices coming from the direction of the storage room. Tamika's laugh, bright and musical in a way that used to be reserved for him. Another voice, deeper, confident. Noah Williams. Derek moved quietly toward the sound, not wanting to interrupt what was obviously a private conversation. But as he got closer, the words became clear, and each one felt like a physical blow to his chest. "Once you transfer to the corporate office in Nashville, we can start our real life together," Noah was saying. "No more hiding, no more pretending. Just us." "I should have done this years ago," Tamika replied, and Derek could hear the smile in her voice. "I feel alive again, Noah." For the first time in years, I feel alive. Derek pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering so hard he was sure they would hear it. Through the gap in the doorway, he could see them. Tamika was in Noah's arms, her head resting on his chest, her wedding ring catching the overhead light as her fingers traced patterns on his shirt. "What about Derek?" Noah asked, and Derek held his breath. "I'll tell him this weekend," Tamika said quietly. "I should have told him months ago. I've been living a lie for so long, I almost forgot what truth felt like." Derek backed away slowly, his legs feeling like they might give out beneath him. He made it to his truck without being seen, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. He drove home in a daze, the words playing over and over in his mind like a broken record. 8 years. 8 fucking years. He sat in his driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the house they had bought together 3 years ago. The house with Tamika's garden in the front yard and her coffee mug still sitting on the kitchen counter from that morning. The house where they had planned to raise children, where they had talked about growing old together. While I was working overtime to pay our rent, she was planning her escape. Derek walked through their home like a stranger, seeing it all with new eyes. The picture from their wedding day on the mantel, both of them so young and full of hope. The vacation photos from last summer when they had driven to the Gulf Coast and spent a week pretending they still knew how to have fun together. Had she been thinking about Noah even then? When she laughed at Derek's jokes on the beach, was she comparing them to Noah's wit? When she held his hand watching the sunset, was she imagining it was someone else's fingers intertwined with hers? He opened their laptop and found what he should have found months ago. Browser history full of apartment listings in Nashville. Searches for corporate positions at Walmart headquarters. A Google Maps route saved from Memphis to Nashville with an estimated drive time of 3 hours and 14 minutes. She hadn't just fallen out of love with him. She had meticulously planned her exit strategy. 2 o'clock in the morning found Derek sitting on their bed, still fully dressed, staring at the wall where Tamika had hung a framed quote about love being patient and kind. He felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside his chest and removed everything that made him human. The betrayal was complete. Not just the affair, but the elaborate deception. The months of lies. The way she had looked him in the eye every morning and said, "I love you," when she was already planning her new life with another man. I wasn't losing her. I'd already lost her. I was just the last to know. The rage came slowly at first, like water starting to boil. Derek had never been a violent man. In 8 years of marriage, he and Tamika had never even raised their voices at each other. But sitting there in the dark, he felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. She had made him believe in forever, then planned to disappear without even the courtesy of a conversation. She had made him an unwitting fool, playing house while she played games behind his back. If she can throw away 8 years like garbage, what do I owe her? The thought should have horrified him. Instead, it felt like permission. Derek remembered Noah's condescending smile during staff meetings, the way he looked at the warehouse workers like they were beneath him. He thinks I'm some stupid warehouse worker who doesn't know his wife is planning to leave him. They probably laugh about me when they're together. Poor Derek, so clueless, so devoted to a woman who can't wait to escape him. The humiliation was worse than the heartbreak. To know that his wife and her lover had discussed his ignorance, his blindness, his pathetic devotion to a marriage that had been dead for months. To know that when Tamika smiled at him over breakfast, she was counting down the days until she could stop pretending. If I can't have the life we built, nobody can. At 2:15 a.m., Derek got back in his truck and drove to Walmart. The parking lot was empty except for Noah's silver sedan and Tamika's blue Honda Civic. They were still there, still together, still planning their escape from the wreckage of his life. He used his keycard again, moving through the store with purpose now. In the maintenance area, he found what he was looking for. A hammer, heavy and solid in his grip, the kind used for breaking down shipping crates and minor repairs around the store. What happened next would haunt the walls of that Walmart forever. Have you ever discovered a betrayal that changed everything? Share with the Guilty Whispers community below. Derek made his way back to the storage room, the hammer hidden behind his back. His heart was beating fast, but his mind felt strangely calm. He had crossed some invisible line in the darkness of his bedroom, and there was no going back now. The storage room door was still ajar. He could hear them talking quietly, making plans for a future that would never come. Derek pushed the door open and stepped inside. Tamika looked up first, surprise flashing across her face. She was sitting on a stack of boxes while Noah stood nearby, both of them looking guilty but not particularly concerned. After all, they worked here. Derek worked here. There was nothing inherently wrong with being in the storage room after hours. Derek, Noah said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that made Derek's jaw clench. You shouldn't be here. The store is closed. If you need to discuss something with Tamika, you can do it at home. We can discuss this like adults. We can discuss this like adults. As if Derek was a child having a tantrum instead of a husband who had just discovered his wife's betrayal. Tamika stood up, smoothing down her Walmart vest, her wedding ring still firmly in place. Baby, what are you doing here? You should be home sleeping. Baby. She was still calling him baby while planning to leave him for another man. I came to pick you up, Derek said quietly, his grip tightening on the hammer handle. Like I always do. Like a good husband should. Something in his tone made Noah step protectively closer to Tamika. Derek, I think there are some things we need to talk about. But not here, not like this. Things like how you're fucking my wife. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Tamika's face went white. Noah's jaw tightened. Derek, please, Tamika said, and for the first time, he heard fear in her voice. Let me explain. Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been planning to leave me while I worked overtime to pay for our life. How you've been laughing about what a fool I am. It's not like that, she said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. Then what is it like, Tamika? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you found someone better and decided to trade up without bothering to tell your husband. Noah stepped forward, his chest puffed out in that corporate way that made Derek want to hit him. You need to calm down, man. This is between you and Tamika. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? Derek laughed, and the sound was ugly even to his own ears. You think this is hard? You think stealing another man's wife is hard work? Nobody stole anybody, Tamika said, finding her voice again. Derek, I was going to tell you this weekend. I never meant for you to find out like this. You were going to tell me what? That you're leaving me? That our 8 years together meant nothing to you? That you've been pretending to love me while you planned your new life? I never meant to hurt you, she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. But I can't keep pretending anymore. I need more than what we have. I need to feel alive. And I make you feel dead? The question sat between them like a landmine. Tamika looked at Noah, then back at Derek, and in that moment of hesitation, he saw the truth. I never loved you the way I love him, she said quietly. I stayed because I felt sorry for you. Because you're a good man who deserved better than what I could give. But I can't live feeling sorry for someone anymore. It's killing me inside. Those words shattered something in Derek that could never be repaired. Sorry for me. She felt sorry for me. 8 years of marriage, and she had been staying out of pity. Every "I love you," every anniversary dinner, every moment he had treasured had been an act of charity. He wasn't her husband. He was her burden. The hammer moved before his brain fully processed the decision. One swing, hard and fast, connecting with the back of Noah Williams' head with a sound like a watermelon hitting concrete. Noah dropped instantly, his body hitting the floor with a heavy thud, blood immediately pooling beneath his skull. Tamika screamed, a sound so sharp and terrified that it seemed to echo off the walls forever. She fumbled for her phone, trying to dial 911 with shaking fingers. "Sorry for me?" Derek said, advancing toward her. "Sorry for me?" The hammer rose and fell again. And again. And again. Tamika's screams cut off abruptly. The storage room fell silent except for the sound of Derek's ragged breathing and the steady drip of blood hitting the concrete floor. He stood there for several minutes, staring at what he had done. Two people who had been alive and planning their future together were now motionless on the floor. Noah Williams, with his MBA and his corporate ambitions, would never modernize another store. Tamika Johnson, who had felt dead in their marriage but alive in another man's arms, would never feel anything again. The rage was gone now, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. Derek looked around the storage room, trying to think. He couldn't undo what he had done, but maybe he could make it look like something else. A murder-suicide, perhaps. A lover's quarrel gone wrong. He placed the hammer in Noah's right hand, wrapping the dead man's fingers around the handle. It was clumsy work, and the blood made everything slippery, but he managed to position it in a way that might be believable. Then he went to the maintenance sink and washed the blood off his hands and arms, watching the pink water swirl down the drain. He found paper towels and wiped down every surface he might have touched, every doorknob, every box. By the time he was finished, it was nearly 3 in the morning. The store would be opening in 5 hours. The bodies would be discovered soon after that. Derek took one last look at the scene, then let himself out through the same back entrance he had used to enter. Hours later, they were dead, and the investigation that would unravel Derek Johnson's life was about to begin. But Derek's attempt to cover his tracks had one fatal flaw that would expose everything. 5:20 a.m. came too soon. Brenda Coleman had worked the overnight cleaning shift at Walmart for 15 years, and she knew every sound the building made, every shadow cast by the security lights. She moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, cleaning the employee break room, mopping the administrative offices, emptying trash cans full of yesterday's paperwork and coffee cups. The storage room was her last stop before clocking out. She pushed open the door and hit the light switch, expecting to find nothing more than boxes of merchandise waiting to be shelved. The scream that tore from her throat brought security running from across the store. Detective Shonda Reed arrived at the scene 20 minutes later, her coffee still steaming in the cup holder of her unmarked sedan. At 42 years old, she had worked homicides in Memphis for over a decade, and she had seen enough crime scenes to know when something was wrong. This one felt wrong from the moment she stepped into the storage room. 2 bodies, both employees, both dead for several hours based on the blood coagulation and body temperature. A hammer placed carefully in the male victim's hand, positioned to suggest he had been the attacker. But the angle was all wrong. The blood spatter patterns didn't match a struggle. And the female victim's injuries were too extensive, too violent for a typical domestic dispute. "What do you think, Reed?" asked Sergeant Frederick Hill, her partner of 3 years. He was crouched beside Noah Williams' body, studying the hammer placement with the same skeptical expression she was wearing. "I think someone wants us to believe this is a murder-suicide," Reed replied, pulling on latex gloves. "But they did a piss-poor job of staging it." The crime scene photographer moved around them, capturing every angle of the carnage. Reed made notes in her small black notebook, documenting the position of the bodies, the blood patterns, the hammer placement that looked like amateur theater. "Victim 1 is Noah Williams, 38, store manager," Hill read from the man's employee badge. "Victim 2 is Tamika Johnson, 30, cashier. Both worked here." "Johnson," Reed repeated. "Ring any bells?" Hill consulted his notes. Derek Johnson is listed as her emergency contact. Husband also works here in the warehouse. Let's talk to the husband. They found Derek at home, sitting in his driveway in his truck as if he had just arrived. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, like a man who hadn't slept. When Reed and Hill identified themselves and asked him to step out of the vehicle, his hands were shaking. "Is everything all right, officers?" he asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew why they were there. "Mr. Johnson, I'm afraid we have some bad news about your wife." Reed watched his reaction carefully. Derek's face crumpled, and he sank against the side of his truck as if his legs wouldn't support him. "No," he whispered. "No, please. Is Tamika?" "She's dead, sir. We're very sorry for your loss." The grief appeared genuine, but Reed had learned not to trust first impressions. "Mr. Johnson, we're going to need to ask you some questions. Would you mind coming down to the station with us?" "Of course," he said immediately. "Anything to help find who did this. Tamika she was everything to me." At the station, Derek's story was simple and consistent. He had finished his warehouse shift at 9 p.m. and gone straight home, expecting Tamika to follow when her meeting finished. When she hadn't come home by midnight, he had assumed she was working late again. It wasn't unusual. The new manager had been implementing a lot of changes, requiring extra training and meetings. "Did you go back to check on her?" Reed asked. "No," Derek said. "She had her phone. If she needed me, she would have called." "What time did you go to bed?" "I didn't really sleep. I was worried. I kept checking my phone, thinking she would text me." "But you didn't try to contact her?" "She gets irritated when I interrupt her work stuff. I've learned to just wait for her to come home." Reed made notes, watching Derek's body language. He was nervous, but that was normal for someone who had just lost their spouse. He answered questions directly, made eye contact, and showed appropriate emotional responses. If he was lying, he was good at it. But the keycard logs told a different story. Back at the store, the security manager pulled up the electronic records of employee access after hours. Every employee keycard was logged with a timestamp when it was used to enter or exit the building. "Here," the manager said, pointing to the screen. Noah Williams badged in at 6:15 p.m. for the evening meeting. Tamika Johnson badged in at her regular shift time, 4 p.m. Neither of them badged out. "What about other employees?" Reed asked. The manager scrolled through the records. Derek Johnson badged in at 10:33 p.m. Then again at 2:15 a.m. Reed and Hill exchanged glances. Two separate entries, hours apart. The first one around the time Derek would have discovered his wife with another man. The second one in the early morning hours when the murders occurred. Is there any legitimate reason for Derek Johnson to access the building at 2:15 in the morning? Reed asked. None that I can think of, the manager replied. Warehouse workers don't have after-hours duties. And if there was an emergency requiring his presence, he would have been called in by management. The security cameras told the rest of the story. The exterior cameras showed Derek's truck leaving the parking lot at 10:42 p.m., then returning at 2:12 a.m. A hooded figure emerged from the truck and entered through the back entrance using an employee keycard. The same figure exited at 2:45 a.m., moving quickly toward the truck with his head down. The interior cameras had been strategically disabled, but the timeline was clear. Derek had discovered his wife's affair during his first visit, then returned hours later with deadly intent. But the physical evidence would be what sealed his fate. Reed obtained a search warrant for the Johnson home and Derek's truck. In the laundry hamper, they found clothes that tested positive for blood spatter consistent with close contact violence. In the truck's cab, they discovered traces of bleach that Derek had used to clean his hands and arms after the murders. Most damning of all, they found Derek's work boots hidden in the garage, wrapped in a plastic bag. The soles contained blood from both victims, and the pattern matched footprints found in the storage room. "The blood evidence doesn't lie," the forensics technician explained to Reed. "Both victims' DNA is present on the suspect's clothing and footwear. The spatter patterns indicate he was within arm's reach when the violence occurred." During the second interview, confronted with the mounting evidence, Derek's story began to change. First, he admitted to going back to check on Tamika during his 10:33 p.m. visit. Then he admitted to seeing her with Noah Williams. Finally, he admitted to returning later because he couldn't stop thinking about it. "I just wanted to talk to her," he said, his voice breaking. "I wanted to understand how 8 years of marriage could mean so little to her." "But you didn't just talk, did you, Derek?" Reed pressed. "She said she felt sorry for me," he whispered. 8 years of marriage, and she felt sorry for me. Like I was some charity case she couldn't get rid of. So you killed her." "I didn't mean to. I snapped. When she said she never loved me the way she loved him, something inside me broke. I loved her more than my own life, and she felt sorry for me." The confession was detailed and devastating. Derek described discovering the affair, driving home in shock, then returning with the hammer he had taken from the maintenance area. He described the confrontation in the storage room, the words that had pushed him over the edge, and the violence that followed. "I tried to make it look like Noah did it," he admitted. "I put the hammer in his hand and tried to clean up. But I guess I didn't do a very good job." "No," Reed said quietly. "You didn't." Then investigators found the one piece of evidence that would seal Derek's fate forever. In Tamika's purse, discovered during the processing of her personal effects, investigators found a manila envelope containing divorce papers. The documents were already filled out, requiring only Derek's signature to make their separation legal. They were dated 3 days before the murders. Tamika Johnson hadn't been planning to abandon her husband without warning. She had been preparing to end their marriage properly, legally, with dignity. The affair with Noah Williams might have been the catalyst, but she had intended to handle the divorce like an adult. Derek had killed his wife and her lover to prevent a humiliation that was never coming. She was going to ask for a divorce, Reed told Hill as they reviewed the evidence file. She wasn't planning to disappear or humiliate him. She was going to handle it properly. So he murdered 2 people to prevent something that wasn't going to happen anyway. That's about the size of it. The trial of Derek Johnson began 8 months later in a Shelby County courtroom. Deputy District Attorney Kiera Brooks laid out the prosecution's case with methodical precision. The keycard evidence proving Derek's presence at the scene. The blood evidence on his clothing and boots. The surveillance footage showing his truck at the time of the murders. And finally, his own confession detailing how he had planned and executed the double homicide. This was not a crime of passion, Brooks told the jury during opening statements. This was premeditated murder. The defendant discovered his wife's affair at 10:33 p.m. He had nearly 4 hours to cool down, to think, to choose a different path. Instead, he armed himself with a weapon and returned to the scene with the intention to kill. The defense team, led by veteran attorney Michael Torres, argued for a lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. Derek Johnson was a man pushed beyond his breaking point, Torres told the jury. He discovered that his wife of 8 years was not only having an affair but planning to leave him for another man. The emotional trauma of that discovery would break any reasonable person. But the timeline worked against the defense. 4 hours between discovery and murder was too long to claim heat of passion. The evidence showed planning and deliberation. Derek had gone home, thought about his options, armed himself, and returned to kill. The key prosecution witness was Detective Reed, who walked the jury through the investigation step by step. She showed them the keycard records, the surveillance footage, the blood evidence, and finally, the divorce papers that proved Tamika's intentions. The victim was not planning to humiliate her husband, Reed testified. She had already taken steps to end their marriage legally and respectfully. The defendant's belief that she was going to abandon him without warning was incorrect. The defense called a psychiatrist who testified about the psychological impact of discovering a spouse's infidelity. The trauma of betrayal can cause temporary psychological breaks, Dr. Amanda Foster explained. In Mr. Johnson's case, the discovery that his wife was leaving him for another man may have triggered a dissociative episode. But under cross-examination, Dr. Foster admitted that she had never examined Derek personally and that her testimony was based solely on reviewing case files. Dr. Brooks asked, would a dissociative episode last for 4 hours? It's possible, but unlikely. Would someone in a dissociative state be capable of planning a murder, acquiring a weapon, and staging a crime scene? That level of organization would suggest the defendant was aware of his actions and their consequences. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning their verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder for both Noah Williams and Tamika Johnson. The judge sentenced Derek to 2 consecutive terms of 25 years to life in prison. As the sentence was read, Derek showed no emotion. He had aged years during the months between his arrest and trial, his hair going gray, his face taking on the hollow look of a man who had lost everything that mattered to him. The Walmart where the murders occurred implemented new security protocols, requiring 2-person authorization for after-hours access and installing additional surveillance cameras throughout the building. A small memorial garden was created in the employee break area, with photos of Noah and Tamika and a plaque reading, "In memory of colleagues taken too soon." But this tragedy revealed one final, heartbreaking truth that would haunt everyone who knew the victims. What would you have done in this situation? Tell us in the comments below. The truth that emerged in the aftermath was more devastating than the murders themselves. Interviews with Tamika's closest friends revealed that she had been struggling with the decision to leave her marriage for months, not because she didn't love Derek, but because she loved him too much to keep pretending. She used to cry and say she felt like she was living a lie, her best friend Monica testified during the victim impact portion of the trial. She said Derek deserved someone who could love him the way he loved her, and she wasn't that person anymore. She felt guilty every day for staying in a marriage that wasn't fair to either of them. The affair with Noah Williams had been as much about finding the courage to leave as it was about finding new love. Tamika had told friends that being with Noah made her realize what she had been missing in her marriage, but it also made her realize that Derek deserved to find that same connection with someone else. She was planning to tell him gently, Monica continued, tears streaming down her face. She had practiced the conversation 100 times. She wanted to make it clear that it wasn't his fault, that he was a good man who deserved better than what she could give him. The divorce papers found in Tamika's purse included a proposed settlement that would have given Derek the house, the cars, and most of their shared assets. She had planned to take only her personal belongings and start fresh in Nashville, asking for nothing that would leave him financially devastated. Noah Williams had encouraged her to be generous in the settlement. He had told friends that he respected Derek and didn't want their relationship to cause him unnecessary hardship. He's a decent guy who got caught in a bad situation, Noah had said. The least we can do is make this as painless as possible for him. For men like Derek Johnson, losing their wife doesn't feel like divorce, it feels like death. When their entire identity is built around being someone's husband, the end of that relationship represents the end of themselves. The rage that drove Derek to murder wasn't just about betrayal or humiliation. It was about the terror of no longer knowing who he was without Tamika by his side. Psychologists who studied the case noted that Derek exhibited classic signs of what they call catastrophic thinking, the belief that a negative event represents total and permanent destruction. In his mind, Tamika leaving him didn't just mean the end of their marriage. It meant the end of his worth as a human being. He couldn't envision a future where he wasn't Tamika's husband, explained Dr. Janet Morrison, who wrote extensively about the case. His self-concept was so intertwined with their relationship that her departure felt like an existential threat. Violence became his way of preventing what he perceived as the complete annihilation of his identity. The workplace affair that triggered the murders was tragically common, but the violence that followed was not inevitable. Mental health experts who reviewed the case identified numerous intervention points where different choices could have led to different outcomes. If Derek had been able to see Tamika's decision as a reflection of her needs rather than a judgment on his worth, the tragedy might have been prevented, Dr. Morrison noted. If he had understood that love sometimes means letting someone go, two people might still be alive today. The Memphis Police Department used the Johnson case as a training example for officers responding to domestic disputes. The investigation techniques that solved the case, the keycard analysis, the surveillance review, the forensic evidence processing, became standard protocol for similar crimes. But perhaps the most important lesson was about recognizing the warning signs of relationship violence before it escalates to murder. Derek Johnson had never been violent toward his wife during their 8-year marriage. There had been no police calls, no restraining orders, no documented threats. Yet the capacity for deadly violence had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface of what appeared to be a loving relationship. The final revelation came 6 months after Derek's sentencing, when Tamika's sister found a journal hidden in her childhood bedroom. The entries, dating back 2 years before the murders, revealed the depth of Tamika's internal struggle. "I look at Derek and I see how much he loves me, and it breaks my heart because I can't love him back the same way," one entry read. "He deserves someone who lights up when he walks in the room, someone who can't wait to share good news with him, someone who dreams about their future together. I used to be that person, but I'm not anymore, and staying is becoming cruel to both of us." Another entry, dated just 1 week before her death, showed her determination to handle the divorce with compassion. "I've decided to tell him this weekend. I've practiced what to say 1,000 times. I want him to know that this isn't about him not being enough. It's about me needing to be honest about who I am now versus who I was when we got married. I hope someday he'll understand that leaving is the most loving thing I can do." Tamika Johnson died before she could have the conversation that might have saved her life. Derek Johnson will spend the rest of his life in prison for preventing a divorce that would have been handled with kindness and respect. Could recognizing these warning signs have prevented this tragedy? Could understanding the difference between love and possession have saved 2 lives? Could seeing a spouse's unhappiness as their truth rather than a personal betrayal have led to healing instead of violence? If you discovered your spouse was planning to leave you, how would you handle that betrayal? What would you do with that pain? Would you be able to see their decision as separate from your worth as a person? Would you be able to love them enough to let them go? Share your thoughts with the Guilty Whispers community below. This is the kind of honest discussion that might prevent the next tragedy. And if this workplace betrayal destroyed you, wait until you hear about the woman who discovered her husband's 3 secret families, each one believing they were his only wife, each one carrying his children, each one planning the same surprise anniversary party for the same weekend. This is Guilty Whispers, where we explore how love becomes obsession, and obsession becomes destruction. The warning signs are always there, we just have to be brave enough to see them. Hit subscribe, ring that notification bell, and I'll see you tomorrow with another case that'll make you question everything about trust. Because sometimes the person who promises to love you forever is the same person planning to destroy you. The next time you feel your world crashing down because someone you love is walking away, remember Derek and Tamika Johnson. Remember that letting go with grace is always an option. Remember that your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to love you. Remember that violence is never the answer to heartbreak. Remember that hours later, they were dead, and nothing was solved. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was saved. Only everything was lost forever.